This is Dr. Sam Westwood, who is a cognitive neuroscientist based at the University of Westminster. And as a keen advocate of open science, he set up the Right Science Club at King's College London, an early career seminar series. It's kind of peer-led, providing training in best research practice that is now supported by the UK Reproducibility Network and has been recently awarded an award by the Society for Improving Psychological Science. And Sam has also been shortlisted for the Dorothy Bishop ECR Prize for his work in promoting open science. I've heard Sam speak before. I've spoken at the Riots Club events. I know I have a lot of interesting things to share with us today. Sam, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Right, so I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully this will work okay. Let's see. Okay, so I'm assuming that is full screen. So I'm
full screen.
Okay, brilliant. That's all good then. Great. Okay, so yes, thank you so much for the invite, especially to and well done all the organisers. It's a fabulous, great sort of set of speakers, and I feel a little bit bad because I've sort of cut short a really great talk, I fear, of Sam Oakley, some of which I will sort of go over as well. So it'd be a nice opportunity to sort of touch on areas that need more oxygen, I think. So yeah, so I'm going to sort of talk to you for the next 20-25 minutes about how we can sort of lower barriers of entry into open science and how to incentivize it, and sort of hopefully move away from just talking about this stuff and actually putting it into action. So I'll just jump straight in. So as we know, there are lots of misplaced or perverse incentives, if you like, in academic research culture. And these are, broadly speaking, sort of an overemphasis on novelty and innovation. We have the publish or perish culture and this sort of relentless focus on the individual, the heroic individual. And these can undermine lots of things where our research is concerned, and also the research culture too. So efforts to confirm and verify previous findings are often shelved to prioritize novelty and innovation. Quality is shelved to prioritize quantity of scholarly outputs. And of course, by prioritizing the individual, we can thwart attempts to collaborate and be collegial and be part of a wider scientific community. And as touched on by Sam in her talk just now, these incentives don't come from anywhere. They are built on a confluence of factors, vicious cycle, building blocks, call it what you will. And these meld together in different ways and cause all sorts of pressures on researchers. But broadly speaking, the kind of take-home message is that we've sort of created this sort of job evaluation criteria and sort of performance metrics that prioritize publication and grant funding track records, which has meant that researchers increasingly are moving away from getting grants to do research to actually doing research to get grants, to bump up their grant capture figures. There's a focus on H indexes and sort of rather than what you publish, but where you publish, and also prioritizing novelty and innovation in the peer review process. And really, really important is the workload. So many of the sort of innovations that, whether it's research integrity offices are trying to implement through training or whether community-led initiatives, many researchers disregard them as just one more thing to do. And so they are much more willing to hold on to their long-held routines because it works for them, or they just want a peaceful life. So because of this, no wonder we're in a replication crisis. Perhaps quite a shrill term to use, But I think we can safely say with not too much exaggeration that we're in some sort of turmoil now with how we can reproduce the results that are being published and whether we can even replicate studies. And given that replication is a cornerstone of good science, I think we should be concerned. So most of the conversation and the noise that's been generated has been focused in social sciences, psychology, but more worryingly, for the snobs in the audience, even the more harder, more important sciences, if you like, to make a value judgment. And I think we can make a value judgment because on the right here, we can see a replication attempt to look at cancer biology, which is incredibly important, of course. And what they found is that when they tried to replicate the results from previous findings, there was a 46% success rate. So 1 in 2 effects that were tried to be replicated were successful, which is, I mean, how did we get to this in the first place? But those are the attempts that were carried out. This group of researchers wanted to actually attempt to replicate results from 193 experiments, but they could only replicate 50 experiments. So forget whether they conducted a replication and what did they find. They couldn't even get to the front door and attempt a replication because the quality of the reporting, the available information was just substandard. So I don't know how we got here, but the incentives and the perverse incentives give an indication of why we are here. But not only is sort of the research integrity or the quality of our practices an issue, the culture is an issue, and no wonder we're seeing this sort of brain drain. Now, we've always seen there's a lot of shift and flexibility in where PhD students, postdocs, lecturers land. They may not stay in academia, they may leave. But it's very different when you see senior lecturers right and up to full professors leave. And I've seen over the past 2 years now, this becoming quite an unusual phenomenon. And this has been picked up by Marcus Manafo in a recent piece, but also in a commentary piece in Nature as well, that people are leaving academia in a non-random way. And Sam already mentioned this, but the Wellcome Trust survey sort of shows you why. You know, there is a pressure to craft a certain narrative from the results through harassing the results until your findings present a particular result. There's issues with bullying and harassment. There's issues with performance metrics. And when you ask people, you know, why do you stay in academia despite these downsides, you often find it's, you know, because of mortgage payments, because they're concerned about whether they'll get another job. So academia has this sort of captive audience, but this situation is just simply not sustainable. Many of the innovations in research, programming, being familiar with coding, being familiar with transparency, participatory research, all of these innovations that are being strung along in the open science movement are really attractive in UX research, in data science, in industry generally. So if you have this academic culture that is hostile to good quality research and is not conducive to a nice place to be, then why bother going in academia? So at the minute, I'm seeing sort of academia as a sort of stepping stone to get the skills to go into industry, but it won't be long before people say, well, why bother? Just get work on the job, just go straight into industry. So we have a real, I think, a brain drain crisis on our hands as well. So what do we do? Well, we know what we need to do. We need to realign best practices with what we reward and recognize, and we need to lower barriers of entry into these good best practices. And I use best practice and open research practices interchangeably. Now, the good news is that the slow creaking wheels are beginning to grind into action. We've seen quite significant successes in DORA, Plan S, and the top guidelines, all of which are sort of encouraging researchers, publishers to sort of reward and recognize open research practices. But as Sam Oakley has said, and as we all know, it's one thing to sign up to these things, it's very different to implement them. And we've already seen with the recent debacle with ResearchFish and UKRI and the contrast between their public persona and what they say behind the scenes, but I won't go into that. anymore. And then you consider groundswell, the sort of bottom-up initiatives that are coming to meet the top-down ones. So the sort of community-led, consensus-based practical guidelines and resources and journal clubs, most notably reproducibility. But these sort of indirectly touch on a group of people that I think are the squeeze middle, the ones that are, maybe they want to do open research, but they just don't know how, or they have all of these competing other interests that just mean that they just can't do it. And it's kind of basically what Sam Oakley said in her previous talk, but it's more focused on people within the supervisory world, and those are senior lecturers. In my view, you're not going to get wider adoption, which remains elusive at the moment, wider adoption of open research and best practice if you don't get more senior academics on board. These people, they review papers, they review grant bids, they can inform academic policies, they are members of scholarly societies, and they're important decision makers. And these include senior lecturers right on up to full professors. And I feel as though these are kind of being missed. They're only indirectly being touched on. And I think so I wondered, in my advocacy work that I've been doing for the past 3 years now and speaking with lots of people, so I have like anecdotal discussions with people, but also the evidence is bearing this out now and it's kind of, I feel almost validated in what Sam Oakley said as well, which is sort of certain themes come up. Senior academics are hesitant to try and advocate for open research practice because it can be seen as punching down or ladder pulling. They got to where they are by adhering to standards that are below, I guess, what we are trying to aspire to today. So it's seen as like you're almost pulling the rungs from underneath junior academics and getting them to do even more hard and more laborious research. They also, don't want to be unpopular in their department, in their university, and they don't want to give more workload to an already prohibitive workload of researchers as well, because there's just a simple lack of time. And people have long-held research routines that they just don't want to budge from. And so you have this awkward situation where you have people who want to help, but they just don't know how. And they're also given loads of overwhelming information. The conference today is packed with constant information. How do you navigate that? How do you know what will work for you and how? So as James mentioned, I started the Riot Science Club, which has been really successful. It's been franchised in several universities across the UK and increasingly in Europe now. We've got about 5,000 nearly followers on Twitter. It's been really, really great. And we run sort of training sessions every week. And members of the team sort of got to think, like, how can we deal with this situation where we're potentially missing out on this sort of senior academics? How can we ease them into open science and sort of improve research integrity in a way that's easy? And, we were thinking, things came like the moral case for why we should make research better is kind of easy and winnable, right? You're not going to get people say, no, we should keep research integrity as it is. I mean, you might do, but in my experience, these are a cringing minority. But really, there's loads of barriers in the way of people doing it, as I've mentioned in my throat clearing of this talk. And one of them is what is in it for me? If I'm going to do this stuff, what are the gains? So that was a common theme that we came across. And we also, because of workload, because of time, that you need to have some sort of guide or something that is very short, sharp, sweet, and to the point, that can signpost other information, and it's just really digestible. So we got our minds together, and we were inspired by this sort of 5 selfish reasons to work reproducibly. And we thought that this was particularly a good, compelling argument for why you should to conduct good research practice. So we published this recently, which was a 3-step guide into how senior academics can support and practice reproducible and open, transparent research. And basically the 3 steps is change how you hire, change how you assign credit to scholarly outputs, and change how we fund and publish. And we tried to aim for the most easiest things that you can do to make slight changes that would have a big sort of impact on your on research integrity and culture. So change how you hire. So the great thing about open research practices is that they confer so many competitive advantages, not only in terms of the job market, but also competing with other academics in your field. I mean, talk about impact. Open access can, on average, accrue greater citations. So can if you preprint your work. Registered reports mean that you can pre-register your stuff based on merit and get a guaranteed publication regardless of the results. So you don't need to worry about trying to craft this beautiful, simple narrative that's hard-hitting and will get you published. And so, you want to do this stuff, but, training in this stuff takes time. Things come up, you can't do it. So we thought, well, why not import this talent, import all of these skills by just changing hiring and promotion criteria so senior academics can have a really good research team that can do this stuff. Unfortunately, evaluation criteria, the boilerplate job specification is, what's your teaching, what's your publication track record, what's your funding, and oftentimes you miss all of the other research skills that can yield all of these great competitive advantages. And as I say, there's massive overlap in open research practices. Now, you're fortunate enough, senior academics are, that there's loads of guidance now of how you can sort of change your assessment criteria. But again, this falls in the trap of being overwhelming and mishy-mashy. So a very simple one, which was based on a bunch of academics who kind of had this consensus idea, which is basically just change your person specification criteria and include, whether in the desirable criteria or essential criteria, open research skills. So, have you got a track record of open data? Have you done pre-registration, peer review, data? Have you shared data, materials? And make sure that this is obviously publicly available and clear so you can attract that talent, but also show that your institution is in support of these sort of practices as well. And of course, this will be a dialogue with members in your department and team and so on to ensure that you don't unnecessarily disadvantage individuals or whole research areas as well. So, an ECR would probably not be expected to get many open access publications, but they might be expected to, have done sharing data code and stuff like this and preprints. And to give examples of how you can do this, Felix Schombrot and colleagues are collaborating with us in putting together sort of a collation of examples of other job specification criteria that have been used in different universities. So I realize I'm just checking the time, so I think I'm okay. I might eat into my question time, but the rest is quite simple and digestible. So that is a way to sort of accrue all of this. This ticks the self-interest box, right? Hire people that are practicing this stuff that will confer an advantage. Then it's credit and allocating credit. So Sam Oakley already mentioned this, and I'm sure people are aware of contributorship and so on. But again, in the paper, we make a good argument, in my view, that from an ECR's perspective, discussions about authorship are a particularly toxic and problematic discussion to have. But also, they can thwart publications. So from a senior academic's perspective, sorting out this authorship issue is a really important point. So from a self-interested view and also from a research integrity view, authorship is a really important thing to get right. And it's something that was brought up in the Wellcome Trust survey as well. Authorship disputes can delay submissions, they can even lead to retractions, and they can have a deleterious effect on people's mental well-being as well. So that said, one of the reasons why, there's lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons why there's issues around authorship is because there's a lack of a sort of consensus-based and comprehensive standard. And there's the Vancouver guidelines, but these don't really deal with contentious issues like first and last authorship and corresponding authorship, large collaborations where it's difficult to dissect who did what and to what degree. And of course, it ignores contributions outside of writing. So, input from a statistician who might not help with the actual writing. Now, Liz Allen, who spearheaded the credit taxonomy, gave a great talk about this for the Riots Club. But basically, a credit taxonomy is one thing that you can use to incorporate into your normal practices where authorship is concerned, or you can make a full shift towards contributorship. And credit now is adopted by leading publishers, and with good reason. You know, it's a consensus-based classification system with 14 distinct contributor roles. So for those who don't know, it has contributor roles from basically the beginning of a research project to the final scholarly output. And it gives you nice definitions of each component of that kind of research life cycle. And basically you just slot names of your research team against each of the roles that they actually contributed to. And you can do this anytime in the project. You can do it during the write-up. You can do it part of a contract leaving, and that safeguards senior academics who are, you know, left with the paper that they have to write because their junior academic has left, and also the junior academic can safeguard that this paper will not be given to somebody else once they have left. But also from a senior academic's perspective, it's really good for them to do it as soon as possible in the whole timeline of a research project. By doing it first, you know, they can manage expectations, they can delegate jobs, and they can also motivate people, because people would be motivated to get as many, you know, initials of their name against the different contributor roles as possible. So it could even motivate them to work harder, and of course, senior academics to be more efficient. You can tweak the credit taxonomy, just to say this as well. So it's not just cataloging things, you know, you can change the definitions, but you have to keep the contributor roles, and you can change the degree of contributorship to lead, equal, or support. And there's lots of advantages to this, as I've already mentioned. So it deals with authorship disputes. It's a good framework to help ECRs navigate those hard conversations. But it also, by signaling to others that you care about making sure that each individual contribution has been properly, transparently catalogued, you signal to potential collaborators that, you know, you are collegial, you are collaborative, you are a nice person to work with as well. And given that we are moving towards collaboration over, you know, just staying within your lab, I think that's a really good thing. Okay, so that's touched on hiring and promotion, credit taxonomy, so dealing with importing talent and also making sure that you are improving the culture around credit and also making your research more efficient. Just to finish on changing how you publish and fund. So we know now there's lots of policies and changes in funding and publication journals in their policies and valuing open research practices. So we decided to deal with a key issue, which is most of this information is sort of siloed. So we, my colleagues Alex and Laurie, for the paper, they did this sort of data scraping where they look for co-occurring words of open research, open science, and funding opportunities. And we created a compiled list of different funding opportunities, from where to go to get open access funding from, to where to go to get, you know, much larger pots of money to do kind of funding to research projects. So like 100K from the Einstein Foundation to do reproducible research. And that was an effort to sort of signpost this stuff that senior academics could either use to find out where they should seek funding to do kind of open research, but also to pass it on to their junior academics to encourage them to seek out funding opportunities. But of course, the other issue is that there's such overwhelming information about what funding policies are regards open research practices, but also publishers' policies as well. So we created a table that puts together different websites that actually compile all of this information in one place. So that was there just to allow senior academics to just try and find very quickly, okay, where do I need to look for to see what this funder's policy is for, you know, open data? I want to make a grant application to them. What are their policies? And to get a nice overview as well. And also to hold journals' feet to the fire if you feel as though you've been dealt a shorthand or unfairly treated by particular journals, and you can use, say, the top guidelines or Sherpa, Juliet, or Romeo to sort of give you more clout. But what I want to sort of quickly finish on is one area which I think can make a huge difference to advocating and implementing open research practices. Very easy, can be done tomorrow, is pre-printing. Now, pre-printing is far more common now, but still people that have a hesitancy. So I'm going to try and make a polemic about why you should pre-print and why there's fewer reasons not to. So I've already mentioned that pre-printing can increase your, well, before I do that, for those who don't know, so a preprint is basically the article that you would submit to for peer review, okay? But in addition to submitting it to peer review, you upload it to a preprint server and you get a timestamp to that preprint, and it can be made freely and publicly available. Now, by doing this, you can make your article open and publicly open within 24 to 48 hours. And so this means that you can increase the readership and the citation impact because it's been in the public more. By the time it comes to publication, you can increase the feedback because the community now can give their feedback. It's also recognized in REF and increasingly on job evaluation criteria. So Wellcome recognizes preprints as a legitimate scholarly output. Now, there are myths and reasons to be hesitant about preprints. So, could they hinder your chances of getting published? Very few journals now actually don't like preprints, but it's always good to check out those that do and those that don't. And Sherpa Romeo is a really great resource to try and find what the policies are by journals, but by no means is it a prevention to getting published. The scooping issue is a big concern for research, but it is a bit of a myth. So if anything, preprints can prevent being scooped because it's time-stamped with a DOI. So you can say, okay, well, you've plagiarized my work and I've got a timestamp to prove that your work came after mine. So there's all sorts of issues. And increasingly now editors are telling me that in really hyper-competitive fields where they get quite similar submissions to a given journal, they can use preprints to establish precedent, and that obviously ticks the novelty and innovation thing, and also helps with the navigating really competitive submissions. So just to finalize and leave time enough for questions. So what I've said to you, it's not a magic formula. There is no magic formula. There's no one size fits all. It's not all or nothing. But really what we try to achieve with our preprint, with our publication, I should say, is, trying to deal with what are easily implementable actions that senior academics could take that would accrue a big change within their research team, within their department, and maybe even across the community if enough people were to take it up. I think there's a lot of discussion about quite structural changes and quite top-down things, but thanks to institutional inertia and just general exhaustion from academics, really, those are quite challenging to implement. So hopefully you can see that these are, easy things to do that I think most academics can just quickly do and just keep pushing the wheels of change forward. I will quickly say that, and just a quick plug, that we are holding a teaching and mentoring conference on the 29th of June. All the details are there. Please check it out. But it's basically going to be a really nice half-day conference where we talk about how to encourage open research through changing teaching and mentoring students. Okay, so that's enough for me. I think I've got 10 minutes for questions, hopefully, and I'm not horribly misjudged the time. So I'm going to stop sharing and then can see you all.
We're absolutely fine with the time.
Okay.
So yes, we've got about 10 minutes for questions. Lots of interesting comments in the chat and stuff coming through the Q&A. Okay, so a few things. Right, okay. Anonymous Andy says, a lot of these practices require academics to know a lot, open specific app to do credit, know where to find open science funding. Is this really helping make things easier for academics in terms of workload, or is it adding to that workload?
I think so. I wouldn't say so. I'm very much somebody that goes off what academics have told me and what they have found easy to implement. So these are not like theoretically this should help. So I find that particularly with credit, well, let's take preprints, for example. I had a particularly resistant supervisor, didn't like preprints, but then as soon as they realized that they were going to get scooped because I presented something at a conference and they needed to have a timestamp document to show that we were the first, to do this kind of work.
Yeah.
They were 100%, that's a great idea, Sam. Same thing with when they reviewed grant funding panels, they increasingly saw the applications that on the CVs that there were lots of preprints listed there. In terms of the credit, again, I find that the authorship disputes can really have a significant deleterious effect on the cohesion of a team and the delay of a submission. So even though there's an initial learning curve, which I don't think is a massive learning curve, there's Tenzing, which I list on my slides, which is a really easy thing. Oh, one thing I should say about Tenzing is that it's basically a Google sheet that allows you to put in all of the credit stuff, really easy, 5-minute job, easy peasy. You can, because it's a Google sheet, you can send it out to the other authors and they can do all the admin for you, put it all in. And not only does it create a table with all of the credit listed, or the authors next to all the credit roles, it also creates the cover sheet for you as well. So you don't need to do all of the superscript 1s, 2s, and 3s and all the affiliations and the title and everything. It does it for you. So these are, by design, being created to minimize the admin load. And so I do think that initially it might mean, yes, there is one thing to do, but the gains and the effort required to do it is, I view, quite minimal for at least one of the steps, if not all of them. Sorry, that was quite long-winded.
No, absolutely fine. More in-depth answers, the better. Okay, a couple of more questions about preprints. Richie asks, is the risk with preprints that non-peer-reviewed data analysis could say things that don't have proper foundation? So an exciting story can kind of get away before being stopped or retracted. And Ian asks, in general terms, do you think preprints can compromise on research quality?
I mean, peer review hasn't done well, has it? And impact factors haven't done well either. I mean, there's this graph that shows that retractions are correlated positively with impact factor. I mean, for me, I just would like academics to read their papers and to critique them. So they're going to do peer review anyway. I mean, I'm not an academic that would just say, well, this has been peer reviewed and therefore I trust it. And I think most academics do the peer review of their own, really. For me personally, I think preprints add value in that they disseminate the information quickly, and I think they actually do perform a key role in the quality control. If you see the preprints that have circulated during the pandemic, yes, there was an issue with how the results were communicated, but that was an issue with the press releases and how the media picked up on it. But generally, there was a huge kickback from academics. And I think academics should have greater faith in community-based post-publication review, which I think was far more effective. And there's also an issue with peer review, which is, we've all seen it done where people bring their own biases and own issues to the peer review process. I know academics that have rejected a paper because they have a similar paper on it. They have their own vested interest to see. So I do think they are a net boon rather than an issue.
Brilliant, thank you. A question about ethics issues for preprint. How do you find in practice things like ethics approval, consent for publication of patient images, that sort of thing, work on the preprint model?
I think that's a separate issue. I think that's more of, data sharing and data archiving rather than, I mean, you're going to disseminate that information. As I say, like your preprint is usually the equivalent, is the same thing that you submit to a journal. So whatever issues that there are with sharing data would apply to your peer review publication as they would to the preprint.
Yeah.
So I think it's a separate thing. I mean, what I can say is that with the ethics point is that it's much easier to do it up front at the beginning and sort it out at the beginning of the ethics process than to retrospectively sort it out. So, you know, if you want to publish responses from participants, make sure that that is sorted out before you even apply for ethics.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, a few more questions. Someone asked about, you mentioned the brain drain in academia earlier on in your presentation, and someone said, is that really a problem in that a large majority of PhDs tend to leave the profession?
That's what I mean, is that, you know, as Marcus said, yeah, PhDs, postdocs, lecturers, they tend to leave. There's an issue with a pyramid scheme in academia, right? That there are only so many places to fill. What is odd and what is unusual is that full professors are leaving, you know, readers are leaving. That is unusual. People have committed their lives to doing it and increasingly report being disillusioned. So that is a concern. So I don't think it is something that is just the general way of things. I think things are changing.
So if the senior people who, it could be argued, I think, suspect not by senior people, have it a bit more comfortable than other people in the research system. And we should be worried about that, but also the implications it has for people in more precarious career structures. Thank you. I do think what's really interesting about this stuff is the fact it addresses, through open research, we also address broader issues within the research system, like a lot of problems with authorship is it tends to be discussed late in the research project. So at best you have people who formed their own quite understandable individual perspectives on how authorship of a paper should look like, and at best you have 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 different perspectives you suddenly have to resolve in a short space of time. And of course, authorship disputes, if there's an authorship dispute, a journal will say, we're not going to publish this until you sort it out. So there's an impact on dissemination of data, whereas these practices encourage people to think about and anticipate issues earlier on. I think that's a very good focus to have, and helps inculcate kind of a bit more self-reflective research practice, which has lots of benefits in other ways. Thank you. Okay, Malika asked, there have been surveys at the University of Oxford about preprints with some concerns that they could be misleading due to lack of peer review, which you kind of touched on before, that this could lead to an extreme growth of publication numbers, and also there's that race to publish first, which could potentially impact on the quality of the research available. Did you have any thoughts on those kind of points?
Yeah, I do have misgivings that they're echoed by Malika, and hello, Malika. So basically, I mean, I could even add to that and say that people might use proxy indicators of the quality of the preprint. So, you know, the academics, whether they're leading experts, or they might use the university from which they come from. And there is a mass proliferation of papers, but for typically, I generally think that, on balance, it will just encourage people to be more critical in their peer review. And I think because it is publicly available, people will have greater opportunity to criticize and to have a wider critical discussion of a given paper without the prestigious journal or the prestige of it being peer reviewed labeled on top of it. I mean, there's been studies where they compared preprints against publications, and what they find is that typically the difference is very slight, and it's usually in how clearly they are written.
Yeah.
So in terms of the quality and everything, the data as yet hasn't really borne out. I mean, this was pre-COVID, so I can't really speak of what it's like after, but I do think that it's more the response, the critical response, that needs to be addressed, rather than, you know, just the dissemination of papers, in my view.
Thank you. One final question. I mean,
okay, I'll be brief.
Your focus, quite understandably, is on open science, but there's greater drives towards openness in research across all academic disciplines. You know, how, from your perspective, how applicable are lots of the stuff that you've been talking about dealing with to the non-STEM disciplines? Is it mainly a case of their kind of themes that other disciplines can pick up on, or in your experience working with researchers from other disciplinary groups, can sort of practices that, for example, you've been talking about be easily picked up by someone, say, in the humanities or the creative arts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and keep it brief. So personally, when I was at King's, I went to loads of different interdepartmental meetings, and I was embarrassed. I came with this ECR with very lofty images. So this paper, I keep calling it a preprint. This paper I wrote was born out of like years of just trying to narrow down what is a universal guide for people. So I do believe that we would land blows in lots of different disciplines, because these are all systemic issues. So I do think that they are broadly applicable. To what degree they are applicable and to how they could get things moving is very discipline specific. I mean, physicists were doing the stuff that psychologists are doing in the 1950s, what psychologists are doing today. But, it could be at least the issues around authorship and how you do that is definitely a sector-wide issue, for sure.
Very much so.
So yeah, hopefully that was, I'm 1 minute over.
Absolutely fine, and very helpful answers and a very interesting discussion. And again, as with all other speakers, lots of interesting comments in the Q&A in the chat. So Sam, thank you very much for
thank you
with us today. And we'll put a booking link to the Writers Club event in the chat, because having attended Writers Club events, they're definitely worth going to, regardless of your discipline and regardless of your place in the academic system. There's lots of interesting stuff discussed at them. Sam, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.